They called me the ghost of Northwood High. But the day the school's biggest bully mistook my silence for weakness, I proved that true power doesn't make a sound. They called me the ghost of Northwood High. It wasn't meant as a compliment. It was a statement of fact. I moved through the crowded hallways like a whisper, a footnote in the boisterous, chaotic novel of teenage existence. I was the kid you'd sat next to in algebra for a year, and still wouldn't recognize in the grocery store. I didn't join clubs, I didn't play sports, and my lunch table was always a solitary island in the sea of cafeteria noise. It wasn't out of shyness, not really. It was discipline. My grandfather taught me that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest, masking their insecurity with volume. True strength, he said, was in observation, in control, in knowing when to act, and, more importantly, when not to. My life was a quiet routine: school, homework, and then the dojo. The dojo was my real home. The scent of worn wood and clean jies, the rhythmic thud of feet on the mats, the sharp ki that cut through the silence, that was my world. For 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, since I was old enough to properly make a fist, I wasn't the ghost. I was a student of Aikido, Judo, and Karate. My grandfather, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a lifetime of mastery, had drilled into me the philosophies as much as the techniques. These are not tools for ego, Leo, he'd always say, tapping his temple. They are tools for peace, your own, and if necessary, others. Of course, Northwood High had its own ecosystem, and at the top of the food chain was Mark Jensen. Mark was the polar opposite of a ghost. He was a walking, talking thunderstorm. A star quarterback with a chiseled jaw, a sneer that was his default expression, and a posse that orbited him like nervous moons. He didn't walk through hallways, he conquered them. Students would practically plaster themselves to the lockers to give him a wide berth. He fed on fear, and the student body provided a daily banquet. I had managed to stay off his radar for 3 years. I was too insignificant, too invisible to be worth his time. I observed his patterns, the way a predator stalks his prey. He never went for the strong ones. He chose targets who were isolated, who would flinch, who would give him the reaction he craved. A freshman with braces, a girl from the AV club, a kid who stuttered. He was a textbook bully, predictable and, to me, deeply boring. I saw the flaws in his posture when he postured, the overcommitment in his shoves, the tells in his eyes right before he'd unleash a verbal tirade. He was a brawler, all sloppy aggression and no technique. An open book written in crayon. The day it all changed started like any other. The bell shrieked, signaling the lunch period, and the human tide surged into the hallway. I was heading to my usual quiet corner of the library when I saw it. Mark and his crew had cornered Sam, a skinny sophomore who always had his nose in a fantasy novel. They had formed a tight semicircle around him, blocking his escape route to the cafeteria. Mark was holding Sam's book, dangling it just out of reach. "What's this, Sammy?" "The Dragon's Emerald. You really into sparkly lizards?" Mark's voice was a loud, condescending drawl. His friends snickered on cue. Sam, his face bright red, just stared at the floor. "Please, Mark, just give it back." "Give it back?" Mark feigned shock. "But I haven't gotten to the good part yet." He opened the book and began reading in a high-pitched, mocking voice. The crowd that had gathered was a mix of amused onlookers and students who desperately wanted to be anywhere else, but were too afraid to move and draw attention. I just watched. My grandfather's voice was a calm presence in my mind. "Do not seek conflict. Avoid. De-escalate. Escape." So I stood there, by the lockers, my own books held to my chest, another face in the crowd. But my observation was different. I wasn't just watching a bully torment his victim. I was analyzing. I saw Mark's weight was too far forward on the balls of his feet. I saw the way his left shoulder was slightly higher, a sign he was favoring a right-handed move. I saw the opening, the vulnerability, the path to a simple, effective takedown. I saw it all, and I did nothing. Then, Mark ripped a page from the book. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sam looked up, his eyes welling with tears. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Because I can," Mark said, his smile widening. He crumpled the page and let it drop to the floor, a piece of literary confetti. He was about to rip another when his eyes scanned the crowd, and, for the first time, they landed on me. Maybe it was because I wasn't laughing. Maybe it was because I wasn't looking away in fear. My expression was neutral, my gaze steady. I wasn't judging him or pitying Sam. I was simply observing. To a predator like Mark, that was a challenge. A ghost had just materialized on his hunting grounds, and he didn't like it one bit. "What are you looking at, freak?" he barked, dropping Sam's book. The spell was broken. Sam scrambled to pick it up and scurried away, melting back into the crowd. The storm now had a new target. Me. Mark swaggered over, his two shadows following close behind. The circle of students reformed, tighter this time. The air crackled with anticipation. This was the show they had been waiting for. The ghost was about to get busted. "I asked you a question," he said, getting so close I could smell the cheap cologne he bathed in. He was a good 4 inches taller and probably 50 pounds heavier, all muscle and ego. I remained silent. Words can be weapons or shields. Silence can be both. My heart rate was steady. My breathing was deep and even, just like in the dojo before a sparring match. My silence infuriated him. It was a language he didn't understand. "You deaf or just stupid?" He shoved me hard. My back hit the cold metal lockers with a loud clang. The books I was holding tumbled to the floor. I looked down at my scattered books, then back up at him. I still said nothing. I could feel the eyes of the entire hallway on us. I could hear the whispers, the stifled giggles. This was his arena. He was the gladiator. I was the sacrifice. "Pick 'em up," he sneered. I bent down slowly, calmly, to retrieve my books. As my fingers closed around my calculus textbook, his boot came down hard on my hand, pinning it to the floor. A sharp, searing pain shot up my arm. I clenched my jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a scream. "I think you dropped something," he chuckled, grinding his heel into my knuckles. "You gonna cry? Gonna cry for your mommy, ghost boy?" I looked up from the floor, my eyes meeting his. The pain was a distant signal, overridden by years of training to focus, to compartmentalize. And in my eyes, for the first time, he didn't see fear. He saw something else, something he couldn't read. It was the calm before a tidal wave. He must have seen it too, because his smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. But he had an audience. He couldn't back down. He pulled his foot back, posturing for a kick. "You think you're tough, staring at me like that? You're nothing." He took a step back, puffing out his chest. "I'm going to teach you a lesson about respect." He balled his hand into a fist, a clumsy, telegraphed club of a fist. He pulled it back, a textbook haymaker that a child could see coming from a mile away. His fist, a blur of motion, aimed right for my jaw, and in that split second the world slowed down. All the years of training, all my grandfather's lessons about control and peace, converged on a single point in time. He thought he was throwing a punch. He had no idea he was stepping into my world. The universe of the hallway contracted to the space between Mark's fist and my face. Time didn't slow down. My perception accelerated. I saw the tightening of the tendons in his neck, the slight flare of his nostrils, the way his knuckles were white, but his wrist was loose, a sloppy punch destined to break on impact. My grandfather's voice was a calm river in my mind. Never meet force with force. Become the empty space where the blow lands. I didn't dodge. I didn't block. I moved with him. As his arm extended, I pivoted on the ball of my left foot, a simple tenkan turn. My body flowed around the punch like water around a stone. His fist, aimed for my jaw, sailed harmlessly past my ear, the rush of air a soft whisper. At the same time, my right hand came up, not to strike, but to guide. My palm made gentle contact with the back of his tricep. I didn't push. I simply continued the circular path his own momentum had started. Mark was a freight train on a single track. He had put all his weight and anger into that one punch, never considering the possibility it might miss. With his target gone and his momentum redirected, he was suddenly a puppet whose strings had been cut. He stumbled forward, his own force carrying him in an awkward, uncontrolled spin. He crashed shoulder first into the very lockers he had slammed me against moments before. The metallic boom was far louder than his shove had been. A wave of confused murmurs washed over the crowd. "Whoa, did he slip?" someone whispered. "What just happened?" They hadn't seen a fight. They had seen a clumsy accident. They couldn't process it. Mark, the invincible titan of Northwood High, had just been defeated by gravity and a patch of slippery linoleum. Mark peeled himself off the lockers, his face a swirling vortex of confusion and incandescent rage. The sneer was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered fury. His eyes, when they met mine, were wild. "You tripped me," he hissed, the accusation sounding weak even to his own ears. He was rewriting the narrative in real time, for his audience and for himself. "I didn't touch you, Mark," I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was calm, even, devoid of fear or aggression. It seemed to enrage him further. "Liar!" he roared, and this time he didn't bother with a punch. He lunged, lowering his center of gravity for a tackle, a football player's instinct. He was going to use his size and power to crush me, to pin me to the ground where technique wouldn't matter. He was wrong. My grandfather always said, "Let your opponent's strength be his greatest weakness." Mark's lunge was a gift. As he charged, I didn't retreat. I took one step forward, closing the distance. As his arms wrapped around my waist, I sank my hips, dropping my own center of gravity below his. My right hand gripped the thick fabric of his jacket collar. My left slid under his arm to grip his belt. For a split second, we were locked together. He was pushing forward with the force of a bull. I was the matador's cape, ready to redirect it. I straightened my knees and twisted my hips. It was a perfect goshi, a major hip throw. It required almost no strength on my part. I was just a fulcrum. Mark's own momentum did all the work. For a breathtaking moment, he was airborne. His feet left the ground, and the 6'2", 200-pound quarterback was floating horizontally over my hip, his face a perfect mask of shock. Then gravity took over. He slammed onto the hard floor. The impact was sickening, a wet, heavy thud that echoed through the now deathly silent hallway. The air was knocked out of his lungs in a pained, explosive woof. No one breathed. No one moved. The entire student body seemed to be cast in stone. Mark's posse, who had been grinning and ready to join in, now looked at me as if I'd just grown a second head. They saw what happened that time. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't luck. It was something they didn't understand, something clean, efficient, and terrifying. I stood over him, my stance relaxed, my hands open at my sides. I hadn't struck him. I hadn't kicked him. I had simply used his own violence against him. I looked down at the gasping, winded heap on the floor. My point had been made. The conflict was over. Mark rolled onto his side, coughing, trying to drag air back into his lungs. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his face pale, his eyes watering from the impact. But through the pain, a new look was dawning. It was no longer just anger. It was a deep, burning humiliation, the kind that turns into something much uglier and more dangerous. He looked at the faces staring down at him, the shock, the pity, the dawning traces of mockery, and his expression hardened into a promise of brutal retribution. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. He got one knee under him, preparing to stand, his eyes locking onto mine with a look of pure murder. The silence in the hallway was a stretched rubber band, about to snap. And just as he was about to speak, a new voice, sharp and authoritative, sliced through the tension like a razor. "Leo Martinez!" I looked up. Mr. Harrison, the vice principal, was striding towards us, his face a thundercloud. His eyes took in the scene in a single, damning glance. Mark, the school's golden boy, groaning on the floor. And me, the school ghost, standing over him without a scratch. Mr. Harrison's presence instantly changed the dynamic. He was the law in these hallways, a man whose authority was absolute. The students who seconds before had been a captive audience at a gladiatorial match suddenly became model citizens, trying to look like they had just happened upon the scene. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Did you see that? The quiet kid just took down Mark. He didn't even hit him." My office, Now, Mr. Harrison commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He pointed a stern finger first at me, then at Mark, who was now shakily getting to his feet, assisted by his two bewildered henchmen. Mark's face was a mottled red and white, a mask of pain and fury. He shot me a look that promised this was far from over. Being taken down was one thing. Being taken down and then dragged to the principal's office was a public execution of his reputation. The walk to the office was surreal. I was flanked by Mr. Harrison, with Mark and his crew trailing behind us. The crowd parted before us like the Red Sea, their eyes following me with a mixture of awe, fear, and morbid curiosity. I was no longer the ghost of Northwood High. In the span of 30 seconds, I had become something else entirely. A legend, a myth, a cautionary tale. I kept my expression neutral, my gaze fixed forward, but I could feel the weight of their stares. I had broken my grandfather's primary rule. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. I had been drawn into a fight, and even though I had won, I knew I had also lost. The vice principal's office was a small, sterile room that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Mr. Harrison sat behind his large oak desk, a man enthroned. He gestured for us to sit in the two chairs facing him. I sat. Mark remained standing, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "All right, I want to know exactly what happened out there," Mr. Harrison said, his fingers steepled under his chin. He looked at Mark. "Jensen, you first, and I want the truth." Mark stopped pacing and pointed a trembling finger at me. "He attacked me, for no reason. I was just walking down the hall, minding my own business, and he came out of nowhere. He suckered me." His friends, standing by the door, nodded vigorously in agreement. "That's right, Mr. H," one of them chimed in. "Leo just went crazy." Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed. He looked at me. "Mr. Martinez, is that what happened?" I took a calm breath. "No, sir." "Then what did?" "Mark was harassing another student, Sam Lowell," I said, my voice steady. "He tore a page out of Sam's book. When I looked at him, he turned his attention to me. He pushed me into the lockers, then stepped on my hand while I was trying to pick up my books. I held up my right hand. The knuckles were already swelling and turning a deep shade of purple. The evidence was irrefutable. Mr. Harrison's gaze flickered from my hand to Mark's face. Mark's bravado wavered for a split second. "He's lying. I might have pushed him a little, but he started it. He was staring at me, trying to intimidate me." "You felt intimidated by Leo Martinez?" Mr. Harrison asked, a note of incredulity in his voice. The question hung in the air. Mark, the all-star quarterback, intimidated by the library kid who barely spoke. It sounded absurd, and we all knew it. "He tripped me," Mark insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "And then he threw me. You saw it. He assaulted me." "I saw you on the ground, Mark," Mr. Harrison corrected him coolly. "And I saw Leo standing there. There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. He wasn't seeing a ghost anymore either. He was seeing a problem he didn't understand. "Leo, I've never had you in my office before. You have a perfect record. No detentions, no absences, a 4.0 GPA. You're not exactly the type to start a brawl in the hallway, but I can't ignore the fact that the star of our football team ended up on his back. You have any explanation for how that happened?" This was the dangerous part. How could I explain Aikido to a man who only understood detentions and suspensions? How could I articulate the philosophy of using an opponent's energy against him without sounding like I was quoting a bad kung fu movie? "He lost his balance," I said simply. The answer was so understated, so ridiculously simple, that Mark exploded. "Lost his balance? Are you kidding me? He flipped me like a pancake. This psycho knows some kind of karate crap. He needs to be expelled. He's a danger to the other students." Mr. Harrison held up a hand to silence him. "That's enough, Mark." He looked back at me, his eyes sharp and analytical. "Leo, you know fighting is a zero-tolerance policy at this school. If I suspend you, it goes on your permanent record. That could affect your college applications. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." "And if I suspend Mark," he continued, his voice lowering slightly, "he misses the championship game on Friday. The whole town will be there. Scholarships are on the line. It's a big deal." The unspoken words filled the office. I can't suspend my star quarterback. Not this week. I understood the politics of high school perfectly. The needs of the football team outweighed the bruised knuckles of a nobody. So here's what's going to happen, Mr. Harrison said, his decision already made. Mark, you're getting 3 days of after-school detention for instigating, and Leo, you're getting the same for escalating the situation. What? Mark and I said in unison for entirely different reasons. That's bull, Mark shouted. He assaulted me. I was defending myself, I stated calmly, but a cold knot was forming in my stomach. You both broke the rules, Mr. Harrison said, his tone final. Consider yourselves lucky. I'm not suspending you both. Now get out of my office. All of you. Mark stormed out, his friends in his wake, but not before he turned at the door and gave me one last look. It was a look that went beyond simple anger. It was a promise. This wasn't over. The school's punishment meant nothing to him. He would deliver his own justice, and it wouldn't be in a crowded hallway with a vice principal just around the corner. I walked out of the office and back into a world that was fundamentally different from the one I had inhabited that morning. The whispers followed me down the hall. I was a pariah to some, a hero to others. I was no longer invisible. I was a target. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I could feel Mark's eyes on me in every class we shared. He wasn't sneering anymore. He was watching, studying, plotting. The bell rang for the end of the day, and I headed towards the detention room, a place I had never seen before. But as I rounded the corner to the empty east wing of the school, I found my path blocked. It wasn't just Mark and his 2 friends this time. There were 4 others with them, all members of the football team. Big guys. They formed a solid wall of muscle and resentment, blocking the entire corridor. The detention room was at the end of the hall. There was no other way to go. Mark stepped forward, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was a very different smile from the one he'd worn earlier. This one held no humor. It was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Detention can wait," he said, his voice a low growl. "You and I have some unfinished business. No teachers, no crowds. Just you. And us." He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing ominously in the silent hallway. "Let's see your little karate crap now." The hallway was a concrete canyon, and I was trapped. 7 of them. All bigger than me, all football players used to physical collision, all simmering with a collective rage channeled through their leader. Mark's smile was a predator's grimace. He thought he had learned from his mistake. He thought overwhelming force was the answer to a problem he couldn't comprehend. He was about to get his second lesson of the day. My grandfather's voice was the calmest thing in the universe. The best swordsman is not the one who wins 1,000 battles, but the one who avoids the battle entirely. But if the battle finds you, end it. Swiftly. My heart rate was a steady drum, not of fear, but of focus. I dropped my backpack to the floor. The soft thud was the only sound. It was the ringing of a bell, signaling the start of the match. I didn't raise my fists. I settled into a neutral stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, hands open and relaxed at my sides. It was a posture of peace, but also one of perfect readiness. "Get him!" Mark snarled, unwilling to risk another one-on-one humiliation. 2 of them charged at once from the front, a classic pincer move. They were telegraphing their intentions from a mile away. Grab my arms, pin me down, and let the others pummel me. It was sloppy, predictable, and foolish. As they lunged, I didn't retreat. I exploded forward, into the space between them. My left hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm, striking the first guy's lead shoulder. It was a simple redirection, a nudge. At the same time, I dropped my weight and swept my right leg behind his ankle, a basic di-ashibarai, a foot sweep. His forward momentum, combined with the loss of his balance point, sent him flying sideways. He crashed into the guy next to him, and the 2 of them went down in a tangled heap of limbs and confused grunts. 2 down in less than a second. The remaining 5 hesitated, their primitive charge faltering in the face of such impossible efficiency. That hesitation was all I needed. One of Mark's original lackeys swung a wild haymaker, the same kind of punch Mark had thrown earlier. I moved inside the arc of his arm, my left forearm deflecting his bicep. My right hand cupped the back of his elbow, and I turned with his momentum. An arm, bar ikkyo, applied with a sharp, downward twist of my hips. He screamed as his elbow joint was pushed to its limit, and I drove him face first to the floor, his body contorting in pain. I released the hold instantly. The goal was neutralization, not injury. 3 down. The hallway felt wider now. Mark and the remaining 3 were staring, their faces a mixture of disbelief and a dawning primal fear. The ghost they had come to exorcise was a demon. "What are you waiting for? He's just one guy," Mark roared, more to convince himself than his friends. He charged, and this time 2 more followed his lead, coming at me from different angles. It was no longer a fight. It was a geometry problem. 3 bodies, 3 vectors of force. My mind was a calculator, instantly plotting the angles and intersections. The one on my left was closest. I met his charge with an irimi tenkan entering and turning blending with his motion. My hand clasped his wrist. My other hand came up under his elbow, and I twisted. He spun around me like a top, his own momentum throwing him off balance and into the path of the guy on my right. They collided with a sickening crunch. 5 down. Now it was just me and Mark. His face was ashen. His posse, his strength, his entire world of intimidation had crumbled around him in less than 10 seconds, dismantled by an enemy who barely seemed to be trying. All his physical power, his social dominance, was utterly useless. He was a king stripped of his crown, standing naked and powerless in his own court. He looked at his friends groaning on the floor. He looked at me, standing calmly in the center of the chaos, not even breathing hard. The rage in his eyes was replaced by something else, pure, unadulterated terror. He had picked a fight with something he couldn't possibly understand. "Stay away from me," he whispered, taking a stumbling step backward. I took 1 deliberate step forward. "It's over, Mark." My voice wasn't threatening. It was a statement of fact. I could have broken his arm, dislocated his shoulder, choked him unconscious. He knew it. And in that moment he saw that I was choosing not to. He saw that I had been in control the entire time, from the first shove at the lockers to this final pathetic standoff. My restraint was a more profound defeat than any punch could ever be. He turned and fled. He didn't just walk away. He ran, his heavy footsteps echoing down the empty hall, the sound of a tyrant abdicating his throne. I stood there for a moment in the silence, surrounded by the moaning casualties of a battle I never wanted. I picked up my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and walked past them, heading for the exit. I didn't even glance at the detention room. My punishment had been served, and so had theirs. The next day at school, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of ignoring me. It was the silence of awe and respect. People gave me a wide berth, but their eyes no longer dismissed me as a ghost. They looked at me with a new understanding. The whispers that followed me weren't of mockery, but of legend. Mark wasn't at school. Word was he'd told his parents he was sick. He was, in a way. His reign was over, not by a coup, but by a quiet, irrefutable demonstration of power he couldn't comprehend. After school, I went to the dojo. My grandfather was sweeping the polished wooden floors, his movements as fluid and practiced as any kata. He didn't look up as I entered. "Your knuckles are bruised," he said, his back still to me. "There was a conflict," I replied, setting my bag down. "Did you seek it?" "No, sensei." "Did you end it?" "Yes, sensei." He stopped sweeping and turned to face me. His old eyes, usually so serene, were sharp and piercing. He looked not at my hand, but into my soul. "And did you find peace in the victory?" I thought of Mark's face, the terror that had replaced the anger. I thought of the fear I had seen in his friends. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, just a quiet, hollow sadness. "No, sensei," I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was no peace. A slow smile touched my grandfather's lips. It was a smile of profound approval. "Good," he said, handing me a broom. "That is the final lesson. Now, help me sweep." And as I swept the floor, the rhythmic motion of familiar meditation, I understood. True strength wasn't in the throws or the joint locks. It wasn't about defeating an opponent. It was about having the power to destroy and choosing instead to preserve. It was about knowing that the real battle is never with the person in front of you, but with the violence inside yourself. In the quiet dojo, I was no longer a ghost or a prodigy. I was just Leo, and for the first time, I was truly at peace.